What mistakes in your experience does management keep making? Lessons from Mythical Man Month aside, what mistakes does management keep making and what do they never seem to learn? And of course the effects on those on you and your peers. I'll add one that even after 200 comments I don't see, failure to explain the reason why. Coming down to their developer with a list of tasks without explaining why those tasks are the most important and will lead to company success. You might think startups are small enough that this couldn't happen, but that was actually where my worst experience was. The founders are visibly in a meeting with a couple people, maybe suits, maybe not. They come out of the meeting and the next day your priorities are rewritten. Cool beans, that's a thing that can happen and that's not my issue. My issue is, why? What are the goals we are trying to hit now? What's the plan? Why is that better than the old plan? This is especially important for more senior engineers responsible for architecture and stuff, because those matters can greatly affect the architecture. Telling me why lets me start getting a grasp on what parts of the code are long-term and what can be considered a short-term hack, what the scaling levels I need to shoot for, and all sorts of other things that are very hard to determine if you just come to me with and actually, our customers need a new widget to Frozzle the Frabaz now more than they need to Doppel the Dipple now. Not necessarily the biggest issue, there's a lot of other suggestions here that are probably bigger in most places, but this is one that has frustrated me. I'll also say this is one you may be able to help fix yourself, simply by asking. If you are in that senior role, I think you pretty much have a professional obligation to ask, and I would not be shy about working that into the conversation one way or another. Greater than this is especially important for more senior engineers responsible for architecture and stuff, because those matters can greatly affect the architecture. Telling me why lets me start getting a grasp on what parts of the code are long-term and what can be considered a short-term hack, what the scaling levels I need to shoot for. This right here has been the biggest problem in my experience. We'll have unforeseen issues arise in production, and the business side will come up with methods to fix the issue. Without context, all of these fixes to our products have been fine, but they never take the future into consideration. It makes me paranoid. I used to adhere pretty well to the adage write code for what you have now and not some mystical thing that may arise in the future while still maintaining enough abstractness to extend things. New requirements would come in, we would implement them, and everyone is happy. 3 months later, a new set of requirements that destroys how we wrote something else. If we knew a roadmap before we started designing and implementing, we could have saved everyone time and money by designing for X plus Y instead of X alone. I get that you can't know everything that is going to happen. I get that there will be times where you must refactor the code. That's fine. However, tell me where the product is going. It may seem like a trivial change to you as a business person, and the only way we devs can keep the change trivial is by proper design. Both managers and co-workers come to me asking me to perform a task. If I don't know why they're asking, then I immediately ask what is the problem you're trying to solve. This is just a different way of asking why. More often than not, this changes the entire conversation. Often this leads to us determining that the task is unnecessary. Sometimes it's that a different approach would be better. Sometimes I do the task with a small modification. Rarely, I perform the task exactly as described. Greater than you might think, startups are small enough that this couldn't happen, but that was actually where my worst experience was. Startups are merely new businesses. New businesses can be poorly run just like any other business can. If anything, startups are probably more likely to be poorly run merely because the genuinely awful ones haven't gone out of business yet. Killing things that are low profit margins, under some misguided Pareto principle approach. Sometimes these things are loss leaders designed to pull customers for other products. Spending too much on marketing/sales before people want the product. They usually just end up burning their brand if the product is too low quality. Too much focus on building multiple small features rather than focusing on the value proposition. Trying to negotiate deadlines for product development. We don't have 2 months to finish this. Let's do this in 1. In software estimation, there's the estimate, the target, and the commitment. If the commitment and estimate are far off, it should be questioned why, not negotiated. Hiring 2 mediocre developers at half the salary of 1 good developer. They usually can't solve problems past a certain threshold. Importing tech talent, rather than promoting. Usually the people who have built the product have a better understanding of the tech stack than someone else they import. Startups that rely on low-quality people to skimp on the budget. These people later form the DNA of the company and make it difficult to improve, if they're not the type who improve themselves. Greater than importing tech talent, rather than promoting. Is often at odds with both the point above and below it. When a company is in rapid growth, there may be a point where the talent they relied on is not quite ready for the promotion they are hiring in for. Without expanding that search outside, you may become stale in the organization, and not provide the right mentorship to ensure that those interested in getting promoted will be able to do their job properly once there. I think the point should be that you would want to ensure that those you import will be able to help promote from within as things progress. Greater than hiring 2 mediocre developers at half the salary of 1 good developer. They usually can't solve problems past a certain threshold. This, so much. No matter how many first year's physics students you have, you're not going to invent general relativity. Greater than killing things that are low profit margins, under some misguided Pareto principle approach. Sometimes these things are loss leaders designed to pull customers for other products. Related, focusing on a single product when your customers rely on you for a suite. As I like to put it, being able to talk to the whole story. Particularly relevant for MSPs, I once worked for one that went hard on cloud first, to the point they stopped talking to clients about anything else. Great, except all those clients lost interest real quick and switched to other providers who would talk to them about their whole story. The short-sightedness of this is astounding. For many of those ex-clients today, cloud is no longer 5 or 10% of their story, and we would have been able to continue selling to them all the way to their current adoption rates, 50% plus, if we had taken them on the journey instead of refusing to talk to them about anything else. I've never met a manager that wouldn't rather pay 4 average people $100 per hour to solve a problem that one smart person could solve in half the time for $400 per hour. There seems to be some sort of quasi-religious belief in the fundamental averageness of humans. Consequently, the difference between developer salaries at any company varies by maybe 50%, whereas the productivity varies by at least a full order of magnitude. Until management realizes this, the only way that a developer on the upper end of the productivity scale can capture their value is to found their own company. I sometimes wonder what would happen if some company simply offered to pay 3x the market rate, and mercilessly filter the results. I think the folks discussing whether or not 10x developers exist are missing the more basic point here. In most companies, a manager's status is determined almost entirely by how many people he or she manages. It's absolutely in their best interest to hire more mediocre people than fewer exceptional people because the correct incentives haven't been put in place for managers in the company. At many places, the best thing that can happen to a manager is for their team to become too big. Oops, now they have to split it into 2 teams, and suddenly they're a director instead of a team lead, or whatever titles are used. In my experience, the 10x programmer is a bit of a myth. Where I have seen people do some incredible feats of productivity, it usually came with a clutch of bad stuff, too. Like, they didn't work well with others and soaked up a lot of management time dealing with their shit. They had really limited areas of expertise where they were amazing, but couldn't fill in for a sick colleague. They worked in 2 to 3 day sprints for ridiculous hours, and then stayed home or might as well have. I'm sure there are incredible people out there who can 10x and also be great team members, and I'm sure management are idiots if they don't pay them 10x. But in my experience, the people who claim to be 10x are usually just insufferable egotists who have no idea of the pain they cause for everyone else. It consistently astounds me how many companies would rather hire 2 to 3 average developers, for average or below average salaries rather than one great developer for 1.5x the price. Here in New York, this is especially acute. Many finance companies have thousands and thousands of developers. They'll have a team of developers, costing maybe $500K/year total, working on a problem which a single excellent developer could easily accomplish, and be happy with $250K/year. Tons of companies are penny wise and pound foolish, mostly because programming is still considered a low-status profession. Greater than until management realizes this, the only way that a developer on the upper end of the productivity scale can capture their value is to found their own company. I sometimes wonder what would happen if some company simply offered to pay 3x the market rate, and mercilessly filter the results. There are companies which do this, but they're almost exclusively pure tech companies. X. Netflix. Interesting to compare your response with the current top comment, particularly the 4th and 5th bullet points. Seems like management is damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they reward high performers in proportion to the value they generate, they kill the culture of the company. If they reward everyone fairly and equally, then all the high performers quit. Full employment theorem for entrepreneurs, I guess. If management is rational, they'll never put the whims of one high-performing employee over the culture of the company as a whole. If that employee is rational, he'll quit and take his work directly to the market. This creates a fresh stream of new startups, each of which either has to be bought back for their true market value, or else becomes the new hot company that hires the masses and hemorrhages its high performers. Greater than I sometimes wonder what would happen if some company simply offered to pay 3x the market rate, and mercilessly filter the results. I've always heard this is the Netflix model. Greater than difference between developer salaries at any company varies by maybe 50%, whereas the productivity varies by at least a full order of magnitude. I like your thought process, but do you really believe this is possible? There are few fields where you can observe order of magnitude differences in salary. As you said, human nature seems to reject this, likely because it does not really occur in the wild. Even in sports it is rare for a particular position to have pay disparity to that degree. I've never met a manager that wouldn't rather pay 4 average people $100 per hour to solve a problem that one smart person could solve in half the time for $400 per hour. In many organizations, quadrupling the number of people that report to you is worth doubling the delivery time, hands down. Number of reports is an easy measure of influence. Maybe, but that makes sense. When this smart person leaves, then no one knows how to keep their stuff going and the system is likely to crash and burn, taking the manager with it. If you have a 4-person team, you can handle people coming in and out over time, using best ideas from the team. We already do that all over. It's called consulting. The outcome isn't higher quality or better work, just capture of perceived value. The super productive developer has a risk/reward ratio. When you get a little older, stability has a value of its own. You need a way to measure productivity. In a team environment that is not so easy. Is it the code, the communication, the business sense, building a good team? Who made that million? And who only made $10? Management will never realize this because to some extent the reasoning is driven by ego. It feels better to be in charge of 20 mediocre producers than 5 amazing ones. Of course there will be exceptions, but the general rule follows. I ran into this problem. I felt like I was worth more than the best offers I was getting. I continued to get job offers, but I couldn't get one for more than $100K remotely or in my area, Burlington, Vermont. I've got many years experience, can solve any challenge, and work at twice the rate of most of the developers I have worked with in the tech stacks I focus on: Ruby, Elixir, React.js/JavaScript/Ember/Angular, etc. So I decided to go at it on my own and charge a rate I felt I was worth. Best career decision I've made so far. I think every developer reaches a point where the only way they can make more is to move into management, and stop being a developer, or branch out on their own. I myself hate being a manager and love being a developer. Managers generally seem to think that a developer is a developer, when there is a clear difference between a $50 per hour developer and someone who can charge $250 per hour in the time it takes to solve the same problem. What takes a $250 per hour dev 1 hour to solve correctly, might take a junior dev 5 hours to just get it working. There is an inherent safety in having 4 average employees write something rather than using your unicorn. It's safe because 3 of them will still be around to manage it when one of them gets a new job, cancer, or retires. On top of that, your unicorns are only really worth their wages if they are solving problems no one else can, or if they are mentoring others. Greater than I sometimes wonder what would happen if some company simply offered to pay 3x the market rate, and mercilessly filter the results. As a developer, what I want is kind of the opposite. I don't want to be paid more than others if I'm more productive, I want to work fewer hours. Pay me for the value of my work, not how long it took to do it. Personally, as a product design manager, I like to find the middle ground. Having a set of 4x employees is useful when you also have a number of 1x and 2x employees that can learn and grow from the influence of the highest skill and or productive employees. Attempting to build a quantity over quality organization is bad for the reasons you list, but all quality, no quantity is a close second in being detrimental. Each critical 4x employee that you have is only beneficial if they stay at your company. Burning them out because a company is ruthlessly focused on keeping their staffing lean by only hiring 4x unicorn ninja guru rockstar developers is a quick way to trigger management to swing the pendulum too far in the opposite direction. Edit, fixed a typo. You're still not guaranteed that by spending $400 per hour on one person with excellent credentials you will have a better outcome than with 4x $100. There is also a balance of risk, especially on longer-term projects. With the 1x $400 person there will probably be less technical oversight, and also if they get ill or leave then the project is serious trouble. I'm not advocating employing talentless monkeys, they still need to be good at what they do, but from a business perspective it's a more complex and wider-ranging decision. BTW. Your example is missing the bus factor. But I understand your point, and actually I do not think that salaries are meant to depend 100% on performance. I think it is more like 90% of time the person invests and 10% performance bonus. That way the one with to 50% higher salary would probably be 5 times as performant as the average dev. If that is fair, is a different, and very difficult, question. This is simple risk management. The risks are too big that you're paying someone $400 per hour without the expected benefits. There's just a too wide margin of error. Pay 4 people, things even out if, and the whole thing just becomes more predictable, and thus easier to manage. Managers are often eager to pay the cost of predictability. How do you propose filtering the candidates? The only way to know for sure how they perform is to actually hire them and see how they perform after some amount of time. Since you will be firing a majority of people, this causes a culture of fear. Interviews are far too unreliable for filtering candidates like you are proposing. Netflix is known for a policy of paying well for talent and being generous when dropping people who don't work out, for whatever reason. Their culture document is a great read. I agree with hiring the 4 people over the 1 star. If that one person leaves or is on vacation, you have a hole in your team. There is a chance of the 4 who are not as capable today, 1 to 2 might become stars in the future. He or she will be more loyal because of the opportunity the manager gave them. These 4x, or 10x or whatever outlandish multiple, developers are rare, if they even exist, unless one constrains the scope of their work to a tiny sliver of their particular expertise. Hiring for such micro-optimization is inefficient at best, ineffective usually, and counterproductive at worst. Whereas the productivity varies by at least a full order of magnitude, I think we need to put the myth of the 10x developer to bed. 99% of the time, the 10x guy is just someone who solved the same or similar problem at his or her last job and are simply exercising their experience. Sure, there are outliers, but that's the same in every field, whereas in programming 50% of people believe that they're the 10x guy and that all their coworkers are slothful idiots. The reason they'll rather hide 4x people that are half as slow, is that they have bums in seats that are available for whatever harebrained idea they come up with. The X10, sick, coder will get bored of the mundane stuff surrounding the complex stuff he loves. Want to jump ahead a few years from Mythical Man Month? Let me recommend People Where by Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister. 2. It's painful that we haven't crawled far out of the 80s practices. The first chapter says, the major problems of our work are not so much technological as sociological in nature. Sorry Google memo dude. DeMarco and Lister called it in the 80s. Speaking of DeMarco, he also wrote a book about controlling software projects before Peopleware. Then in 2009 he denounced it. 1. To understand control's real role, you need to distinguish between two drastically different kinds of projects. Projector will eventually cost about $1 million and produce value of around $1.1 million. Project B will eventually cost about $1 million and produce value of more than $50 million. What's immediately apparent is that control is really important for Project A but almost not at all important for Project B. This leads us to the odd conclusion that strict control is something that matters a lot on relatively useless projects and much less on useful projects. It suggests that the more you focus on control, the more likely you're working on a project that's striving to deliver something of relatively minor value. I always think about that when I'm doing a sprint review. 1, 2. Fascinating. Is the A-B situation DeMarco describes about knowing ahead of time that A will turn minimal profit while B will turn maximal profit. If so, the conclusion reached seems right. Tighter profit margins require tighter control. And control requires resource, which is a cost that further diminishes returns. But if the described scenario is about not knowing ahead of time whether A or B will turn a large profit, how should this be handled? Regular review, and a scaling down of control as confidence in profit increases. Of course, profit is only one metric. There may be others that are more critical. I recommend the short book, 132 pages, by Gregory Brown, released late last year, Programming Beyond Practices, $14.99. Detailed examples of the many problems developers encounter, including the thought process it takes to solve them. Working for a company building heavy hardware, I see the following happen time and time again: reorganizing seemingly for the sake of reorganizing. Result: every time the new organization has settled somewhat and people know who to interact with to make things flow smoothly, everything is upended and back to square one. Trying to make our products buzzword compliant without understanding the consequences, we've on occasion been instructed to incorporate technologies which are hardly fit for purpose simply because everyone else is doing it, where everyone is the companies featured in whatever magazine the CEO leafed through on his latest flight. Yes, I exaggerate a bit for effect. Misguided cost savings: most of what hardware we use, we buy in small quantities, say, a few hundred items a year, maximum. Yet purchasing are constantly measured on whether they are able to source an equivalent product at a lower price. Hence, we may find ourselves with a $20,000 unit being replaced by a $19,995 one, order quantity, 5 per year, and spend $10,000 on engineering hours to update templates, redo interfaces and see. Assuming a man is a man is a man and that anyone is easily and quickly replaceable, except management of course, and not taking the time and productivity loss associated with training new colleagues into account. Edit, an email just landed in my inbox reminding me of another. Trying to quantify anything and everything, one focuses on the metrics which are easy to measure, rather than the ones which matter. As a result, the organization adapts and focuses on the metrics being measured, not the ones which matter, with foreseeable consequences for productivity. Reorganizing seemingly for the sake of reorganizing these things often to be the observable consequence of political battles between executives. From what I've observed, there are always clear winners and losers in these battles, although it may take a while to work out who lost and who won. From the perspective of the execs who were for the reorgs and who come out on top, these reorganizations are positive things even if they are bad for the company as a whole. Typically they don't care about the company as a whole, only for what they can get out of it. Edit, a colleague once said that the behavior of executives became far easier to understand and predict once you found out their individual bonus calculations were done, which, of course, we weren't supposed to know. My two biggest ones are on this list. Software is not an assembly line. It is part science, part art. We are not interchangeable. You can't take an embedded engineer and hope for good luck on a Node.js project. Constant reorganization. I worked at a major internet company in the late 90s, early noughties, and they literally reorganized every 2 years. It was usually under the guise of helping communication and fostering growth, but it simply just toggled from a vertical project-based organization to a flat and wide matrix organization. Such a waste of time, energy, and resources. Haha, we had the buzzword compliance too. Once a sales junior came to me and said, "This year I will make our product be the center of the big data hype," like it was some meaningful concept, besides having much data. Misguided cost savings is the worst when it comes from engineers. Software developers love to optimize, so if they can save $500, $1,000 a month by rolling their own service instead of paying for an existing one, they'll do it, completely ignoring the fact that their time costs money. Greater than reorganizing seemingly for the sake of reorganizing, this definitely happens every time a manager or executive is replaced or hired. And it's easy to see why it happens despite the damage it causes. Executive turnover might not be the cause in your case, but if it is, the good news is you can see it coming. There are some very common ones: building a one more generation of product than the market supports, so you build a new version when the market has moved on to something new. Rewarding productivity over quality. Managing to a second-order effect. For example, when Nestle bought dryers, they managed to most profit per gallon, which rewarded people who substituted inferior, and cheaper, components that lead to lower overall sales and that leads to lower overall revenue. Had they managed to overall revenue, they might have caught the decline sooner. Creating environments where nobody trusts anyone else and so no one is honest. Leads to people not understanding the reality of a situation until the situation forces the disconnect into the mainstream. Rewarding popular employees differently than rank and file. Or generally unevenly enforcing or applying standards. Tolerating misbehavior out of fear of losing an employee. If I could fire anyone in management who said, "Yeah, but if we call them on it they will quit," see what a bind that puts us in. I believe the world would be a better place. There are lots of things, that is why there are so many management books. Smile. Greater than tolerating misbehavior out of fear of losing an employee. What if said employee pulls in 10x, 100x more revenue/value than average worker for the company? Would you fire him because the rulebook say so? That said, I trust in effective communication as soon as possible to manage difficult situations or misbehavior. Often the reasons can be deeply personal or family related, and people are preoccupied with stuff outside work. We are human, and human relations are variable, not absolute. On the Nestlé example, one of the biggest constraints in a business is employee focus. Theoretically, you want to maximize future free cash flow. Unfortunately, there are many inputs: rev growth, solid ROI on CapEx, lowering non-essential costs, employee retention, unit costs, brand, etc. Management teams have to distill the message about what they want in a way that many employees can get behind. Nestlé was too focused on unit costs, and should have likely added one more constraint like rev growth, but if they added too many, employees as a group would lose focus. Most businesses have 2 to 3 essential business drivers. 1 is never enough, 4+ is likely too many to focus on. I have held management and non-management careers in roughly equal proportion over my career. My list would look like this: 1. Believing you can dramatically change the performance of an employee. It's very rare to save someone, and less experienced managers always believe they can. 1.5, corollary to the above, not realizing the team is aware and waiting for you to fix the problem and won't thank you for taking longer to do what's necessary. 2. Believing that people don't know what you're thinking, people see you coming a mile off. 3. Thinking you can wait to fix a compensation problem until the next comp review. Everyone waits too long on these. 4. Believing HR when they tell you that you can't do something that's right for your team. What they're really saying is that you have to go up the ladder until you find someone who can force them to make an exception. 5. Not properly prioritizing the personal/social stuff. At least this is my personal failing, and why ultimately management has not stuck for me. 6. Believing your technical opinion matters. I've seen way too many VPs making technical decisions that they are too far from the work to make. Trust your team. It'd be fun to see a list of these from the non-management point of view. I'd start off with the inverse of number 6 above. 1. Believing your technical opinion matters. The business is what ultimately matters. 6. Believing your technical opinion matters. I've seen way too many VPs making technical decisions that they are too far from the work to make. Trust your team. It needs management people who understand their role as being facilitators, rather than being decision makers. And they are kind of rare. In response to 1 and 1.5, the company should expend reasonable resources to support those who are struggling, and these rules are laid down in human resources policies, as I'm sure you know. Management are just as bound by the rules as non-management, or should be. Of course, reasonable here has a strong subjective component. I have seen dramatic change in an individual, but it's the exception. More likely is a slow progression to dismissal. This can be handled well by management with appropriate skills, but is hard and is often suboptimal. However, it's possible that this process is a necessity in any organization that supports its staff. Wishing it to not happen is unrealistic, and indicates naivety. Perhaps these naive, disgruntled employees are part of a larger problem. You can't change it dramatically overnight, but you can certainly change it enough that it's worth it. It's a boatload of work. Expect to spend as much time per week as you usually spend on 3 to 5 people. Then make the call if you can afford to do that. It's buying you a lot in terms of employee goodwill and team morale. The second one only if you don't neglect the team over it. Obviously smile. Trying to write code alongside their devs. Here's what happens when a manager tries to fill tickets himself. His sense of control of the project is derived not from relationships of trust and cooperation with his reports, but from direct involvement in the code. So naturally, any challenging or critical piece of code ends up getting written by him, because otherwise, how could he be confident about it? The manager is essentially holding 2 jobs at once, so they end up working late or being overly stressed at work. The devs will feel intimidated to make architecture decisions, because they know if they do something their manager doesn't like, it will get refactored. They will also feel as if they are only given the grunt work as all the challenging work is taken on by their manager. The code itself is in a constant state of instability because there is a tension between the manager needing the other employees' help to get the code written on time, while also needing to have that complete control and mastery over the code that can only come from writing it yourself. So people's work gets overwritten continually. This is very bad and it's very common. Managers should learn to delegate it. That is an essential part of their job. If they can't delegate, they should remain as an individual contributor and not move into management. I couldn't agree more here. As a manager, you need to do all the shit work. The work the team hates. Add integration, third-party phone calls, AWS cost cutting, etc. All the grunt work too. Going through every goddamn QA ticket. If you do this, your team will perform at a higher level. Pushing crap work to the team will demotivate them and force multitasking.
Hey guys, this is the Rogue YouTuber here. I recently had a big change in my life. I had a baby daughter. Here she is. If you could do me a favor and remember to hit the subscribe button and bang the bell, I'm hoping to really create a YouTube channel that really gets people excited and brings people the best, most interesting content collated from across the internet. I'm saving up to save my little girl to Carnegie Mellon Computer Science Department. So please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.